In the open kitchen, Hector stood right behind me, trapping me against the counter. One hand slipped toward my apron, while the other casually grabbed a blueberry and pushed it toward my mouth. My face flushed. He smirked, his voice full of teasing. Sis, you've got quite the bite. From the dining area across the room, Mommy Jenny turned her head and looked at me, confused. Jenny, are you cold? Why are you shivering? I never thought that the person I had a crush on for 3 years would end up becoming my stepbrother. The day I moved into the Gale family's house with my mom, I stood by the front door, completely drenched, water dripping from my hair and clothes. Hector slowly strolled up with an empty bucket in his hand, his eyes scanning me up and down with a wicked smile. Oops, my bad, slipped. He paused for a second, his tone mocking. But with how little you're wearing, maybe you wanted to cool off anyway. I looked down at my soaked white shirt, realizing you could faintly see my bra through the fabric. Panicked, I quickly covered myself with my arms. Hector's grin widened, even more shameless. He definitely saw everything. The thought sent a wave of heat rushing to my face. Hector! Samuel rushed over. A jacket with a light scent of soap fell on my shoulders, and Samuel stood protectively in front of me. Jenny, go change your clothes. I'll deal with him in a bit. I was ushered into the downstairs bathroom, my heart still racing. It was my first time seeing Hector since I'd developed feelings for him years ago. He was just as handsome as before, if not more. But he clearly wasn't happy to see me. I guess I couldn't blame him. After all, my mom did disrupt his family. Bam, bam, bam. A loud knock on the door made me jump back several steps, startled. Hector? I muttered nervously as his voice came from the other side. Brought you some clothes. My heart, which had just started to calm down, went wild again. I stared at myself in the mirror, drenched, disheveled, and didn't dare open the door. But Hector wasn't giving up. He started twisting the doorknob, only to find it locked. Open the door or I'll kick it down. I knew he meant it. When Hector made a threat, he always followed through. Scanning the room in a panic, I grabbed a towel and draped it over myself. By the time he reached the count of 3, I rushed to the door and swung it open. Hector leaned casually against the door frame, arms crossed, holding my clothes over his elbow. He was tall, and with a slight tilt of his head, he looked down at me. His sharp features stood out, perfect eyebrows, a strong nose with a small mole on its tip. His eyes flicked down to my chest, and his lips curled into a sneer. What's the point of covering up? Didn't you want to show it off? It's not like that, I whispered defensively, the hurt in my voice bubbling to the surface. I never wanted to show off to anyone. Jenny, stop pretending. Your mom's a homewrecker, and you're just a little temptress. She seduced my dad, and now you're here trying to seduce my brother. His brow furrowed in irritation. Take off my brother's jacket. I froze. If I took it off, he'd see everything. But if I didn't, he'd get mad. Take it off, he repeated. I clutched the towel tighter, my eyes shifting to the clothes he held. Give me the dry clothes first. Hector lifted the bundle of clothes slightly, just out of reach. I reached for them, but he jerked them back. Want them? Beg me, he said, tilting his head with a sly grin. Just give them to me. I lunged for the clothes. Hector quickly raised them higher. No matter how much I jumped, I couldn't reach. How tall was he exactly? I tried again, putting even more effort into the jump, but just as I reached for them, I lost my balance, falling forward, and crashed right into Hector's chest. Tisk, I heard him chuckle. What, you trying to pull the same tricks as your mom? Think you can seduce me? Hector's voice dripped with sarcasm. Suddenly aware of my position, I realized my whole body was pressed up against him, my upper half especially. And worse, the towel I'd draped around myself was slipping, barely covering anything. I quickly pulled the towel back around me and turned away, hiding my face in shame. What's the matter? Not going to keep going? Hector mocked, his voice cold. You'll never seduce my brother with tricks like that. I wasn't trying to seduce anyone, but no matter what I said now, Hector wouldn't believe me. Tears welled up in my eyes, my heart aching with the weight of his misunderstanding. I knew Hector hated me, and hated my mom, too. His mom had just passed away when we moved in, and my mom had taken her place. Of course he hated me. I understood that, but I couldn't stand being so unfairly accused. Hector! Samuel's voice cut through the tension. What the hell are you doing? Standing outside a girl's bathroom? What kind of manners are those? Why are you always on her side, bro? Jenny's new here. You should be looking out for her. And by the way, she's older than you, so show some respect. Hand her the clothes. Hector shot me a glare but finally tossed the clothes to me, gritting his teeth. Here you go, sis. Make sure you take care of them. Samuel sighed, turning to me apologetically. Sorry, Jenny. He's always been a bit of a jerk. Go ahead and get changed. I took the clothes, whispering a quiet thank you before closing the door. Once they were gone, I sat in the bathroom, clutching the dry clothes in my arms. Tears streamed down my face. I'd had a crush on Hector for 3 years, only to end up his stepsister and the target of his resentment. After I changed into fresh clothes, Samuel mentioned that the whole family would be having dinner together later. Before moving in with the Gales, I already knew Samuel. He was my teacher's top student, and apparently this connection mattered now. True to his responsible nature, he made sure to take care of me, just like my teacher had told him to. At the dinner table, my mom couldn't keep her eyes off Mr. Gale, as if she'd forgotten I even existed. I didn't want to attract attention either, so I ate in silence. But of course, Mr. Gale couldn't resist bringing me up. I hear Jenny's in the same school as Samuel. What a small world, he said, nodding approvingly at me. If you need anything, just ask Samuel. He's reliable. I will, Mr. Gale, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Gale beamed. Such a sweet girl. No sooner had he said that than Hector made a scoffing noise, stabbing his chopsticks into his bowl. What an act! Mr. Gale's face darkened immediately. Hector, show some respect. Samuel gave him a warning look, too. Jenny just moved in. She's a girl, and you should be looking after her. I braced myself for Hector to argue, but instead he said with a smirk, Fine, I'll make sure to take real good care of her from now on. Build some family bonding time. He turned to me with a smile that made my skin crawl. Though he behaved the rest of dinner, I could feel the tension simmering underneath. Afterwards, I quickly excused myself and went back to my room. While I was unpacking, someone knocked at the door. I figured it was probably my mom, so I opened it without thinking. But when I looked up, I saw Hector standing there. I froze for a moment before instinctively trying to shut the door, but Hector wedged his foot between it and the frame. You? I started. Before I could finish, he forced his way inside, slamming the door shut behind him. Bang! He shut the door behind him, crossing his arms as he casually leaned against it. What? What are you doing? I backed away instinctively, putting as much distance between us as possible. Hector's eyes roamed the room before they landed back on me. Do you like my brother? What? Where did that come from? I quickly shook my head. Really? Hector tilted his head. Isn't that why you moved in here? To get close to him? I didn't, I denied, but he wasn't listening. He stepped closer, looking down at me. His height made it impossible to escape his gaze. Then why'd you move in? Your mom said you weren't too keen on the idea. My stomach churned. There was no way I could tell him the truth, that the only reason I moved in was because I found out he'd come back home. I stayed silent, and Hector took my lack of response as an admission. His eyes narrowed. So it's true, little temptress, trying to seduce my brother, huh? I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. You're wrong. Now please leave. Hector scowled, leaning in even closer. Stop playing games with me, Jenny. Don't you dare try to seduce him. I bit my lip, helpless, unable to explain myself. Before Hector could say anything else, there was another knock at the door. It was Samuel's voice on the other side. Jenny, it's me. Samuel, do you have a minute? Just as I was about to answer, Hector's hand shot out, covering my mouth. My eyes widened in shock as I tried to pull his hand away, but his grip was firm. He leaned in, pressing me against the door, and whispered, "Shh, don't make a sound." My heart raced as panic set in. Hector was so close, his warm breath against my cheek. I struggled, trying to push him away, but it only made him grin. Jenny? Samuel called again, sounding concerned. I tried to squirm free, but Hector held me even tighter. And then, to my utter disbelief, he kissed me. My brain short-circuited. Hector was kissing me. On the other side of the door, Samuel was waiting for a response while I was trapped, locked in a kiss with his brother. The realization made my blood rush to my face. I pushed at Hector's chest, but he only deepened the kiss, his free hand pinning mine above my head. Jenny, are you okay? Samuel's voice was more urgent now. Desperate, I mustered all my strength and kicked Hector's leg as hard as I could. Ow, Jenny, damn, Hector hissed, finally letting me go, rubbing his leg with a pained expression. Are you really that eager to open the door for him? He teased, but his eyes darkened. I wonder what he'd think if he saw you like this. What are you talking about? I asked, horrified. He leaned in closer, his voice a low growl. He doesn't know you like him, does he? What do you think he'd do if he found out you've been in here, making out with his little brother? Fear gripped me as I realized what he was saying. I stared up at him wide-eyed. You wouldn't. Hector didn't respond. Instead, he slowly reached behind me, his hand hovering near the doorknob. I panicked, my voice trembling. Please don't open the door, please. His hand paused and he glanced down at me, amused. Begging now, huh? What happened to that bravado earlier? His smirk faded as he pressed me closer, the heat of his body overwhelming me. If Samuel saw us like this, Hector's fingers brushed the doorknob. No, don't, I whispered desperately, trying to push him away. I could feel his grin against my ear. Tell me what I want to hear, and maybe I won't. My heart pounded as I tried to think of something to say that would stop this. If Samuel opened the door, I'd be ruined, and Hector knew it. But before I could respond, Hector turned the handle. Wait, Hector, I started, but the door cracked open. My mind went blank. This was it. I was done for. In one swift move, Hector spun me around and pushed me forward. I stumbled out of the room, nearly tripping over my feet, just managing to catch myself in the hallway. The door clicked shut behind me, and I quickly spun around, my heart racing. Hector was nowhere to be seen. Jenny? Samuel asked, stepping closer. What's going on? Your lips. They're so red. I blinked in confusion, then instinctively raised a hand to my mouth. My lips were burning, probably from the kiss I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. I'm fine, I blurted, trying to change the subject. What did you need, Samuel? He gave me a concerned look, but didn't press the matter. It's not much. I just wanted to apologize for earlier. Hector can be a real jerk, but he doesn't mean any harm. Don't let him get to you, okay? I nodded, feeling guilty, knowing that Hector was the least of my worries right now. Samuel handed me a glass of milk and gave me a soft smile. If he ever bothers you again, just let me know. After Samuel left, I opened the door to my room, and there was Hector standing there, arms crossed, smirking like he had won something. You, I stammered, too angry to form a coherent thought. He laughed softly. You sure are obedient when it comes to him. Then, with a mocking smile, he took the glass of milk from my hand and drank half of it in one gulp. You? Before I could react, he grabbed my chin, tilting my face upward, and without warning, he poured the remaining milk into my mouth. I choked, sputtering as the cold milk dripped down my chin. Hector, looking smug, wiped my face with the back of his hand as if he'd just done me a favor. Satisfied, he walked out of the room, leaving me standing there in shock. It took me a long time to calm down after that. I had a terrible feeling I'd just made things worse with him. Later that night, I lay in bed, thinking it over. My mom finally came to see me, and I expected her to offer some comfort after everything that had happened. But instead, she told me I needed to be more patient, that I should stop provoking the Gale brothers, especially Hector. Look, honey, I don't have much of a choice here. Your Mr. Gale hasn't even agreed to marry me yet. I bit my lip and nodded. I understand. After a sleepless night, I woke up late the next morning. By the time I got downstairs, everyone was already having breakfast. Samuel wasn't there, probably out for work, but Mr. Gale greeted me warmly, while Mommy Jenny gave me a look of disapproval. "Jenny, sit down and have some breakfast," Mr. Gale said cheerfully. I hadn't even started eating when Hector piped up from across the table. "Hey, sis, I heard your strawberry jam is amazing. I'd love to try it." Mommy Jenny beamed. "Oh, yes, Jenny is really good at making jam. Why don't you go whip up a batch for Hector?" I shot Hector a wary glance. The mischievous glint in his eyes told me he was up to no good. But I was stuck. Reluctantly, I nodded and headed to the kitchen. It wasn't difficult to make, but it took time, and at least it gave me a break from sitting at the table with them. I was halfway through the process when Hector strolled into the kitchen. He claimed he was there to help, but I knew better. He just wanted to bother me. Pulling out a container of blueberries from the fridge, he smirked. "I heard you like these. I bought them just for you." Every time he called me sis, it felt like a trap. He picked out a blueberry and held it up to my lips. "Go on, taste it." I instinctively took a step back, wary of his intentions. Hector leaned in, his voice dropping lower. "What's wrong? You don't trust me?" Then, in one swift motion, he pressed himself up behind me, trapping me against the counter. "You?" I started, but he grabbed my hand, pulling me closer. "Show me how you do it, sis. Maybe I'll cook for my dad someday." He was too close, way too close. The kitchen was open and the dining table was just across from us. My mom must have heard the commotion because she chuckled from the other room. "Jenny, why don't you show Hector how it's done? It's good to see siblings getting along so well." I nodded quickly, scooting forward to put some space between us, not wanting to make a scene. I tried to tell him to step aside. "You can stand over there and watch." "I like it better from behind," he whispered, stepping even closer until I was practically leaning over the counter. My whole body tensed. This was getting way too out of hand. Suddenly, Hector's arm slipped around my waist, pulling me flush against him. "Careful, sis. You don't want to get hurt, do you?" he said in a low voice, his breath brushing against my ear. I jumped, startled, and the spoon I was using to stir the jam fell into the pot with a clatter. "Hector, I began, trying to push him away, but his hands were already sliding lower, resting on my waist. He didn't seem to care that we were in plain view of the dining room, where my mom and Mr. Gale were still having breakfast. "Sis, you better hurry. If the jam burns, it'll be ruined," Hector teased, his voice low, as if this was all some kind of joke to him. My hands shook as I grabbed the spoon again, trying to focus on stirring the pot. But with Hector standing so close, practically glued to me, it was impossible to think straight. My free hand reached out to the counter, trying to find something to ground me, as I felt Hector's other hand wander dangerously close to the edge of my apron. "Hector, stop!" I whispered, my voice trembling. "This isn't funny." But he only chuckled softly. "You're right, it's not funny at all. It's just fun." I grabbed his wrist, trying to stop him from moving any closer, but Hector only smirked, easily slipping his fingers from my grasp. "Relax, sis. You're doing great," he said, completely ignoring my protests. My pulse quickened. I could feel the heat from the jam, the heat from his body pressing into mine. I was trapped between the stove and Hector, unable to move. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see my mom and Mr. Gale still chatting. Oblivious to WA, shiver ran down my spine, and I froze, unable to process what was happening. Just then, I heard my mom call from the dining room. "Jenny, are you cold? Why are you shivering like that?"